Morning, everybody. I'll make no apology for the fact that this is going to be a bit technical. I've tried to break it down, but remember, this is the very beginning. This learning how to commission, or the training around commissioning, I've done a postgraduate module in strategic commissioning, and that took 9 months. So don't expect to grasp it. Don't be worried if you really don't understand it. It will come to you eventually. But I'm going to try and make it as as professionals, we do try and make it more complicated than it really is, because we like to think that our jobs are really complicated and we're really important. It is not complicated. There's a lot of complicated language talked about it. So, first things first. Me. I'm Ben Hughes. I'm the Head of Wellbeing and Public Health at Essex County Council, and I'm the Associate Director of Wellbeing and Public Health for North East Essex Alliance. That's a mouthful. But part of my job is to commission drug and alcohol services across the county, and that's part of my responsibility, and that is just Essex, not Southend and Thurrock, although we are joining up more and more with Southend and Thurrock. So that's me. Where do I come from? I've been commissioning drug and alcohol services since 2000. Bloody hell, 23 years. And before that, I was delivering drug and alcohol services in prisons and in the community. So I've been in the industry since 1990, geez. Okay, so quite a while. There are too many of you to do the introductions today, but obviously if you're going to ask a question, if you could just say who you are, it would be useful just so that I know who's asking the question and we can capture it on film. Ground rules. Respect everybody. Respect everybody here. Everybody has their own views. They are their views and they are appropriate to them. And we need to respect that during the day. Listen, and listen not just to me, but to everybody here and to each other. Speak one at a time, but do speak, please. I want this to be as interactive and as much a conversation as possible. Be present, physically and mentally. Keep an open mind. Some of this may challenge your ideas of how things should happen, but just be open to that. Everything that's said in this room, other than on the film, it will stay in this room. Mobiles on silent or off. Done that one, thank you, Joe. And there are no stupid questions. There is not a single person here that could possibly ask a stupid question. Everything is valid. Every question is valid to your understanding of exactly what it is we are going to be giving the authority to do. And today, as I say, is just a start, because it's a big job. A very big job. And it's important. There you go, that's the big answer. What is commissioning? It's the commissioning processes through which public bodies assess the current and future needs, blah, 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 blah. It is a big, and often some people make more complicated than it generally is. But traditional notions of what commissioning are changing. Once upon a time, commissioners thought they were the people that had a budget and spent a budget, had a budget, bought a service. And that was it. And it was about transactions. I've got money, you want to deliver the service, I'll give you money, you do the service. Off we trot. And everything was rosy in the garden. It is so much more than that. And I like to think, and I'm going to brainwash you all into thinking the same way, is that commissioning is about developing systems, leadership across systems, building relationships, working with people, working together to get the best we can out of the resources that are available. And I will always say resources, because it's not all about money. Because as Lawrence said, we've got 14 million-ish pounds. That sounds like a very big number, but that's for the whole of Essex. And it don't go very far. If you think learning disability services in Essex have got around about £250 million. We've got 15 million. Drop in the ocean. But this is what we're aiming at, bringing people together. I hate the word stakeholders, but I wanted to leave it in there because this is sort of the bigger picture. This is what people will talk about. Partnerships between commissioners and providers, simplifying financial arrangements, offering improvement support to providers, because it's not all about getting rid of providers, it's about supporting what already exists if possible, because it's far more efficient. Because just one little bit of insight. Every time we re-tender a service, so every time we go back out to the market to seek a new service for delivering something in Essex, the 6 months before that service starts and probably the year after, performance just drops off the scale. Because you've got a new provider coming in, you've got new staff to manage, you've got new processes to get in place, you've got new relationships to build, and all of that takes around about 18 months. And 6 months before a contract terminates, you've got staff looking for other jobs because they might not want to work for the new provider. And a year afterwards, you've got recruitment processes, you've got relationships being built, and you've got delivery to be mobilised. It doesn't happen overnight, and we see performance plummet. And it takes at least a year to get anywhere near to how performance was before. And that is impacting on you and the community, because that means there's less capacity to deliver the support that is absolutely vital. So if we can do this by improving existing provision, by getting existing providers to work better together and using your views to challenge them, because I can challenge them, but they'll just tell me that that's just the way it is. It's a bit more difficult if you challenge them, because you can say, no, it isn't. Actually, the way it is X. Oh. Okay? So, simple definition. It is the process of developing a clear understanding of need. You can't provide services to something that you don't understand. If you have no idea what the scale and nature of the need is, how can you allocate the resources to address that need? So you have to first of all understand what is needed, which is why you are the best people to do this, because you can get out there and really understand what the need is. We've started the process because you've commissioned the recent needs assessment. You've trained some peer researchers. We need more of that because I'm talking big we, I don't mean a long we, big we need to understand it. And it can't be just every 5 years. We need to constantly update our understanding of need. Because if we let a 9-year contract to a provider pound to a pinch of poo, the need in the community will change during that 9 years. We'll have a new government, we'll have a new pandemic possibly, we'll have a new something that will impact upon the need. So we need to be fleet of foot, we need to understand what the need is, and we need to consistently update our understanding of need. Your job. So we need to understand need, current and future. We need to prioritise what we need to do, because with £14 million we can't do everything. So we need to set a series of priorities, because as much as we'd like to do everything for everybody, even with another couple of £1 million we'd struggle. And we need to meet those needs efficiently, so best use of the resources. Effectively, they need to work. And safely, because we can't have people not being safe. Or, let's not beat about the bush, dying, because they are. And from within the range of resources, not just cash that's available. So that sentence is basically commissioning. Right, I'll go now. But for the drug and alcohol world, there are certain restrictions, requirements placed upon us, you as well. We have a national drug strategy. It sort of covers alcohol, but we will take it to mean alcohol as well. Clinical safety is vital. We cannot have services that harm people or don't do people good. They have to be safe. We have to have a balanced treatment system, because your need is not the same as your need, the same as my need. It has to be a system that works for all, as far as possible. But there are conditions, because the government gives us this money, and I'm giving it control of it to you. We have to pay the piper. We have to deliver within certain bounds. We are as flexible as we possibly can, and we twist and move a bit and flex a bit, but we have to do it within those grant conditions, because otherwise they'll stop giving us the money. So there are certain conditions, and most of the conditions are the ones above: clinical safety, balanced treatment system. And there are other responsibilities that we need to do. But commissioning is changing. It's becoming more about systems leadership and development of those systems. Because so there are things that we don't... Go on, Ruth.
now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Please do ask the questions when they crop up.
If you said about the services bidding for contracts, so if I mean I've been working with a company that happened to
Yeah.
service bidding. So wouldn't the money be best spent, because obviously when a new inevitably there's change when a new service
Yeah.
like you just said
Yeah.
there's done, but isn't the money best spent helping to support the efficiency of the service that's already running before
Yes.
it gets, do you know what I mean?
We are much more focused nowadays, and this is why we let longer contracts. We used to let 3-year contracts, and it used to be a nightmare because every 3 years everything would change. We now let 9-year contracts, and in that 9 years we work as much as we can to work with the providers to improve their performance. When I say we, I mean you as well, because you are going to be doing this. We need to work with those providers to point out where they're not working efficiently, to get them to work more efficiently, to work with them. Improvement support to providers. We have to see our job not as, and I'll come to how we do the contracting and how we want to see the contracting go forward, but it has to be about a relationship. Because technically we need to fund services that have the same principles and the same views as we do. Because if we have a shared view of what we're trying to achieve, then actually we're all doing it together. Commissioning is not having money, letting a contract and wandering off and sort of saying, off you go, deliver it. We'll come back in about 7 years' time and see how you've got on. Commissioning to me is the least important bit is awarding the contract. The most important bit is that every month, every year, every whatever, building the relationships between you and the services, but between the services and each other. Because otherwise the system will become complicated, hard to access, hard to move within, and unless we can fix that, we might end up doing what some other areas have done, and I'll warn you off this later on in the slides, which is let the whole thing to one provider. And what you end up with then is a provider that can hide all sorts of stuff from you because they can make it all look great. The whole point is that we all have a shared idea of what needs to happen. We all share in the desire to achieve the same outcomes. But equally, I can challenge me, Ryan, previously Sarah. Well, no, it will be Sarah as well because she'll be representing you on many of the groups that are doing this work, or working with you to get you involved in those groups. I'll leave that to you to sort out. But we're handing responsibility for doing all of that work, influencing the way the resource, because there is also the possibility to say to a provider, well, actually, you shouldn't be doing that, they should be. Or you're both doing that, why are you both doing it? I'm going to take a bit of money here and give it over there, and then simplify the pathway. You don't have to go through a procurement process to do things like that. You can vary contracts. There is also, and I wasn't going to go into it today, but I'm going to just raise this little nugget. There's something coming from the government called the provider selection regime. If services are working well, why would you want to re-procure them? Why would you want to go back out to the market? Because it just destabilises the market. It makes everybody feel anxious and uncertain. It makes providers feel like they're going to lose their jobs. It makes service users feel like they're going to have to develop relationships with new services. It destabilises the whole thing. What the provider selection regime will enable us to do is, if a service is working well, we can develop the evidence of it working well. We can go to our Lords and Masters at County Council Cabinet, because ultimately they will have the money still. You will have control of it, but they have to make that decision. And we can say to them, it's working well. We don't want to go to the market. And they can go, tick, okay, then don't. So sense is starting to prevail. So there will come a point where we can say collectively, don't want to go to them. Why would I go to the market? It's working really well. Okay, don't. And I'll come on to some of that later on. But it's so much more about leading the system, developing the system, making it all work well. You can have 20 providers. You can have one provider. Well, I'd caution against that. But you can have as many or as few providers as you want. But if they don't work well together, we might as well all go home. So our job is to make sure that we've got the right providers, and there are of high quality, but then we also have to make sure that they work together and we improve that quality. We support them to improve their quality by pointing out maybe that doesn't work so well. We're quite lucky in Essex. Sarah would hopefully back me up. I think we're quite lucky because we've had providers in place who've been in place for quite a while. We don't let contracts on a really regular basis, so we try and reduce that level of competition. We've also got providers who are very good at their bit of it. So we've got STARS, the prescribing service, which is provided by an NHS provider. That comes with its own challenges, it comes with its own issues, but ultimately we have a clinical provider providing medical services. We have Open Road, who've got a history of developing really good drug services, and we have Phoenix, who've taken over and are building their provision around alcohol services. We have the Forward Trust delivering the community rehab provision. They've all got their expertise in various bits of it. The thing we've got to get to happen is we've got to bring them together to work together and stop the competition. We've got to reduce this idea that, and I hear it quite a lot, oh, our clients. They're not your clients. They live in Essex. They're our clients. They're not your, Open Road can't say, oh, these are our volunteers or our clients. And Phoenix can't be turning around and saying, well, our patients or our. They're not. They're Essex people. And we need to get them to start. And that, again, is part of the job. It's about making sure they work together. And actually sometimes, and we've had a few moments where we get them in a room and I stand in front and bang the table and say, oi, stop it. This is not how you get things done. So this is part of the problem. And it's a commissioning cycle. And this is part of why commissioning sometimes gets stuck into a bureaucracy and stuck into a process. Because people try and do the sort of whole thing and they follow it religiously, and it's like, and you'll see my big problem with this is you assess the need, you review service, you decide priorities, you design services, you shape the structure of supply, you plan capacity, you support patient choice, you manage performance, and then you seek public and patient views. Really? Then? So, and this is sometimes why commissioning gets tied up in a process that is not helpful. They try to draw it as best they can to make sure people understand it. As a process, it's fine. But my view is that one should be a big box around the whole thing. And also, they talk about that all the time. That's the solution, procure services. No, it bloody well isn't. It's about mobilising resources. Because there will be things provided across Essex that will support drug and alcohol users in across the variety of needs that they present with that I don't fund. So we need to find those services and make them work with us because they're free. They'll be free to us. We won't have to pay for them. But if we get them involved and engaged, and the simple example is the fellowships. AA, NA, CA, GA, Al-Anon. We need to get, they're not going to come out and join us as part of the system, but we need to get them working with us. We need to get our referral routes into those services better. But there'll be other things out there and we need to go and find them. There's me and Ryan. I can't find them. I haven't got the time. You can. And we need to pull them into the system and we need to mobilise those resources to work with us as a part of the system. So that's a commissioning cycle. It's worth bearing in mind that they exist. There are as many different cycles as there are commissioners because they all draw their own version of it. But basically it's a process of, as I said, assessing need, mobilising resources, reviewing performance and going round the whole cycle. And that's you. That's what you'll be doing eventually. We're not going to just dump you with it. But you'll need support to do the job because with all the best will in the world, and there probably are some amongst you, but there may not be finance managers that are comfortable with managing that amount of money. There probably aren't people who could write a contract that Essex County Council would be happy with. And there are other commissioners that we need to get into the table, like health, like the police and crime commissioner, like other local authorities like districts and boroughs, who've all got money, who we need to lever in. So you need support to do some of that technical work that's really the dull bit that sits behind supporting you to get the real work done. And in health, they have something called commissioning support units. And they really do the dull bit. So you don't have to think about, oh God, how do I pay that invoice? How do I set, all of that stuff. For the purposes of this and future discussions going forward, you need to see my team, Essex County Council Public Health Team, as your commissioning support unit. Because we'll do the dull stuff. Because we've been doing the dull stuff for years. And we've got reasonably good at it. So it's a range of support services, like at scale working. So we can start bringing in partners who you may not have the time or the skills to engage with. We can work across Southend, Essex and Thurrock. We can also work nationally with government, with you and for you. So we can do some of that. And we're going to define that by way of developing something called a memorandum of understanding between Essex Recovery Foundation and Essex County Council Public Health that says what we do and what you do and how they join up. And we need to do the same as you've been talking about, make sure that we're not in competition, that we're not duplicating and that we're complementing each other so that A, you feel supported and B, I can reassure politicians at Essex County Council that public money is being spent appropriately. Because that's another thing, and I'll come to that again. But basically, me, Ryan, Neil, and these are other members of the team that have sort of touching relationships with drugs and alcohol. Neil, Claire Bartley, I've forgotten somebody, I'm sure I have. Emma Tulip Betts, who commissions the Topaz unit at Broomfield. We are your support, and we will support you. Most of our engagement will be directly with the RAC, with Sarah, with Lawrence, with Sally, with Joe. But we will also want to do things like this and get together and work together on things, because actually that's the way we're going to get things done well. Because we don't want you to have to fill your head with contracts and terms and conditions and all of that stuff. I don't want to get involved with that. I get Ryan doing all that stuff, but yeah. And as I've said, it's changing. It was always about buying services, and it turned into this transactional mess where we give you money, and every quarter we come and beat you over the head with a big stick, and we threaten to take your money away, and everybody hates each other, and nobody trusts each other. And we have to enable this shift towards thinking strategically, thinking about the bigger picture, and making sure it all works, so that we can collaborate. And we can plan and improve services together. And this is when we start getting into what I would call the fun bit, which is actually starting to make the change so that things are better, so that our money is being used more effective, our money, because it's all of yours as well, our money is being used better. And this means instead of, we don't want to focus on procurement and contract management. It has to be done occasionally, contract management all the time. But we want to focus on understanding need, determining priorities, and designing and planning the resources and services to meet the needs. And it's all about building relationships. That has to be key. That has to be key. Because if you we'll get to the point that was raised in the questions that we've had, you bang up against this point where nobody works together, everybody's duplicating effort, and everybody's trying to compete commercially with each other. And there's no point to it. There is absolutely no point to it because it is counterproductive. So it's about the relationships. It's not the same thing. So this is sort of a précis. It's not the same thing as just procurement, because procurement is about acquiring services, about buying things, it's about buying a service. It's putting services out to tender. Identifying and mobilising the resources to support people to have better and more independent lives. Because that's the goal at the end of the day. Recovery. As defined by individuals, not by me or you. Because you can't define your recovery, and you know the picture. And where services are required commissioners, because you're all going to be commissioners. Well, you already are. You're getting there, I think. Can use different ways of doing this. You can contract. You can have a 5 to 9 year contract. That's fine. You can also look at identifying monies. So if you raise some money and you want to do something different, you can go to the market and ask organisations to bid for a grant, which could be a 2, 3, 4 year grant, and you can let a grant. You can award a grant to somebody and get them to work alongside. So if you start raising significant money as the charity, you don't have to go through the whole turgid problem of procuring a service. You can go out to the market and say, we would like bids to deliver this, because this is what we want. They come in and bid, you give them a grant. It's much simpler than contract management. And they can, but again, you would want them to integrate with the existing provisions, so you might award the grant to an existing provider. So there are smarter ways of doing things. It can also, as you've mentioned, about building on existing provision. It's not always about getting rid of something because we don't like it. It's about making sure you do like it. Because commissioning is about also making sure that you are the ones that define the need and you are the ones that define the solution. Because you're not buying something off a shelf. You're defining what it needs to be. God, this is dreary, isn't it? No, sorry, no. No, it's not. I promise you it's exciting. I promise you it is exciting because you can see the change. And you want things to flourish, because if services don't flourish, you don't get better. If services are not good enough, make them good enough. Work with services, because to be honest, you could let it to Joe Blogg's Drug Services. As long as Joe Blogg's Drug Services have the right approach and have a culture that wants to see recovery, then Joe Blogg's Services might be the best people to do it. But you have a responsibility to make sure they are continuing to do the right thing. Because they'll take them. We all do it. We all think we've got the right things, so we take our foot off the pedal. We take our eye off the ball, and things drift a bit. So we need to keep the foot down. And ultimately, this isn't the end of the training, by the way, it has to be about the outcomes. The other thing that commissioners and procurers and commercial people and bureaucrats can be really guilty of is setting pages and pages of output, numbers doing this. You tell me if the number of sessions of psychotherapy delivered tells you whether somebody's got better or not. And yet we continually measure the number of sessions delivered. It might be the worst counselling, the worst caseworking, it might be the worst intervention possible. But as Lawrence said, we can tick a box. We've funded 25 of these and 25 of those have been delivered. Doesn't tell you whether anybody's got better. Just tells you that you've done something. And doing something is not an outcome. That is an output. What we want to know is how many people have got better? How many people, while they're in treatment, are getting better? Because that's another thing we historically weren't measuring, is actually during somebody's treatment episode, were they getting better? Was the service good enough to make them get better? Because if they're getting better, when they leave, the chances are they'll have a better chance of staying better. If they just go through a process of delivering 25 of these and then let somebody out, the 25 of those might have made no change whatsoever. And then they discharge a person, and guess what? Back round to the beginning again, 6 months, a year, 2 years later. So it's got to be about outcomes. Yes, we have to work out we're getting value for money, but ultimately we'll get value for money if more people get better. That's value for money. We've always said it's about recovery, and I know this is a bit of a double-edged sword, argue about recovery, but we've always tried to anchor it on its recovery as defined by the individuals who are in treatment or in receipt of the support that we're funding. Recovery is not abstinence. There will be people who view abstinence as the ultimate goal. That is absolutely fine and correct. But there will also be people that say, I don't want to use heroin, crack, cocaine anymore, but I'm going to have a drink on a Saturday night. If they can work it, I drink on a weekend. I don't drink during the week. Rarely anyway. Careful. And I am careful. I did a year clean because I wanted to make sure that I could do it. And people had told me that I was an arsehole when I was drunk. And that I was always drunk. So I did a year clean just to experiment. And yeah, felt much better for it. But it is about the individual. And we can't punish people for not wanting the same thing as us. We can't rail against somebody else's view of what their life needs to be to make them fulfilled, happy. Go on.
Can I just ask a question? Is there anybody on your commission team that has lived experience?
No.
There isn't?
No.
Right, okay.
No. And I make no apologies for that.
No,
That's why you're here.
No, yeah, I just...
Yeah.
Yeah,
However, there are people in the treatment system who have lived experience. There are treatment providers who have lived experience. The chair of the Essex Recovery Foundation board has lived experience, very recent lived experience. The chair of your RAC has lived experience. You have. That is why we want to do this. Because I've been doing this 20 odd years, 30 odd years, if you count delivering services. I still don't know what it's like to be in receipt of treatment services. I can understand and empathise with people's journeys through treatment, but I haven't experienced it, and but then you haven't experienced it in Somerset or Dumfries, and you've experienced your journey through treatment. What we need is as many of that as possible, so we have a shared vision and a view of the future. Which is why we always say we strive to define it as what it means to the individual. Because I get really twitchy about people saying, if you're not abstinent, you haven't achieved. It's like, really? Let's be careful about judgments. Just a little bit. If abstinence is right for you, then we need to support you to achieve and maintain abstinence for as long as we possibly can. But we need to have that flexible view. I'm not saying please go and use tomorrow. Please. That is not what I'm saying. But we need to be open to everybody's experience. And the charity will have their own view on that. We need to reduce harm. We have to reduce harm. That is the key. As well as driving at the outcomes around recovery, we have to reduce harm to the individual, the family, and the community. Because love it or loathe it, that's what the National Drug Strategy is driving us at, and that's why we get the money we get. And actually, it's bloody common sense. It's absolute common sense. We start with the individual and reduce the harm to them. That could be providing harm minimisation services, safer injecting, needle and syringe exchange services. Heaven forfend, overdose prevention centres. One day maybe. You know, having somewhere that somebody can come and inject safely and not die in an alleyway is a bloody good step. Because you can then possibly engage them in some more support and maybe introduce the concept of not injecting your drug anymore. Introduce them to people like yourselves who've got through it and are living a normal life. And I really do struggle with the phrase normal, but you know what I mean.
Not got through it,
going through it, yeah, and that's it. So it's about improved lives. Whether it's lifelong abstinence, whether it's just getting better and being well, healthy, safe. And there'll be the outcomes that you and the wider community want to define within the framework that was set by the government, which is fairly broad. It's not that divisive. It's quite broad. But you need to start defining some of the outcomes that you want the system to achieve for you and your community and the community around you. You'll hear commissioning talked about, and then you'll hear people talk about joint commissioning. It's all of the above, but in partnership. Because we've got £14 million. I need to dispel a myth. The NHS, or health, put absolutely no money at all into drug and alcohol services in Essex. None. Zero. And we need to bring them to the table with their budgets. Because I fund currently, and we fund currently, services in the hospitals designed to reduce the burden placed on the hospitals. Health should be paying for that, because I should be using that money to pay for more community provision. So we need to take the message to health that you need to work smarter. The other one, and Sarah knows this firsthand because of work we were doing before she left me and came and worked for the charity. I won't let it go. We commission services for illicit drug use and alcohol. There is a really growing problem with prescribed opiates and prescribed and over-the-counter medications and dependence. I haven't got the money to pay for those services because if we suddenly did, there'd be nothing left for alcohol users or illicit drug users. And alcohol users and illicit drug users are always the bottom of the pile because it's cleaner to use prescribed medication. It's cleaner to be addicted to Zopiclone, whatever cleaner means. So we are insisting that if the NHS wants services to support people with addictions to prescribed medications, or if they want services in hospitals, they really need to start putting their hand in their pocket. Because it's about £1 million I spend on hospital-based services. So if I could get that million from the NHS, that's another £1 million we can invest in the community. Or if we could get £1 million from the NHS, instead of just having alcohol-related services in hospitals, we could have drug and alcohol services in hospitals. Because at the moment they're alcohol only, because that's all that the hospitals worry about. So there's all of these bits of work about about pulling partners in. I get £400,000 a year from the Police and Crime Commissioner. If you deliver effective drug and alcohol treatment to the community, it is the biggest protective factor about reducing offending, short of legalising drugs, which would be positive, negative. But it's the biggest protective factor about preventing people offending, and yet I get £400,000 from the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner. So our services are delivering massive outcomes for his police force, but he pays me £400,000. We need to work on that one. The district councils, so Tendring District, Colchester, the councils that sit below Essex County Council, although I wouldn't say below in their hearing. They contribute little bits of money here and there. But by delivering effective drug and alcohol services, we're reducing the burden on their housing services, because people can retain their tenancies more effectively. We're reducing the burden placed on their nighttime economy areas, so their streets are safer-ish. But they don't contribute any money at all. Well, they pay a little bit towards the SOS bus in Colchester and Chelmsford. So we need to start bringing them into the picture. So all of these areas are things that we can work on with you and do some of the work for you, but we need to drive joint commissioning more effectively. Because they all sit around the table and want their voice to be heard, but they don't bring any money with them. The only people that bring some money with them are really the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner and Probation, and they bring teeny tiny bits of money. So we need to give some thought to that. But joint commissioning is and this is where it becomes highly skilled and complicated, because you've got to start then understanding everybody else's agenda. And you've got to start working with them to bring them to the table. And that's the bit we can help you with, because we can broker those relationships. And it's about transformational change across all of those agendas. So changing the way that health view drug and alcohol users, and it all goes to the point about that Lawrence raised about the fourth part of your plan about perceptions and stigma. Because if you can reduce stigma, change perceptions, then actually you and the wider community become just more people that need their support rather than drug and alcohol users. I mean, we have GPs who've written to us saying we will no longer accept drug and alcohol users on our caseload. It's like, you've already got them. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but they're already your patients. You just haven't asked them the question. So when a GP can say, we don't want drug users in our buildings, it's like, really? You can't say that, surely. So we need to break those barriers down. And it is what we're striving for in Essex. And we will help you to strive for that. And we will help you to bring people to the table. And actually, one of the biggest changes, and I think it's something that's really positive, is the dual diagnosis world. So where it's a coexisting drug and alcohol and mental health issue. I think it was Nathan and you stood up at a dual diagnosis meeting. Was Nathan, wasn't it? Yeah. Nathan stood up at, Nathan who's you all know Nathan Marsh. Hopefully you know Nathan. Stood up at a dual diagnosis meeting and started telling mental health services exactly what the experience of drug and alcohol users was of mental health services. And it was really hard for them to argue that that wasn't how it was. Because it wasn't me saying it, it was Nathan, who's only relatively recently come out of treatment. And actually, as a result of that, dual diagnosis services and mental health services are working much harder to be accessible. There's a way to go, but they are working much harder because it's really difficult to argue with lived experience. Really difficult to argue with lived experience because you can't tell him that's not how it was, because it was. So health are coming on board. That's the money. £14.2 million. Public health grant, and then the next lot are all new monies that have come as a result of the Dame Carol Black review, which all of that new money is promised up until the end of 24-25, and we've got everything crossed that either after the general election or when we get to the next government spending review, where they review the departmental spending, that all of that will continue. We're fairly certain that that one possibly won't, the housing support grant. But I also commission housing Peabody to provide floating support services, so we will manoeuvre them to fill some of that gap. And that's why we need to work together. But hopefully all of that will continue. We also get a small amount of money from adult social care towards the Vulnerable Adults project that Phoenix Futures deliver, and we get, as I say, we get about 340,000, 400,000 from the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner. So it's about £14.5 million. Sounds like a huge amount of money. It really isn't, and you'd be amazed to see how quickly that falls through your fingers. Only about £4.5 million of that goes to the NHS prescribing service. The rest of it goes to Open Road, to, well, you'll see in a minute. But that's what you're going to have to start making decisions about. And that's where you can also start the process of raising additional monies. Because you're a charity. I can't do that, you can. And I know Lawrence has ideas about how that can be delivered in the future. Because anything you raise, you can spend as you want to. I can't tell you how to do that. Fab. These are the opportunities that I think are available to us. As I said, no contributions from health. We're exploring new funding around non-illicit drug users, joint commissioning, and the hospital alcohol and drug teams, all of which I mentioned. Essex is, I'm going to possibly bore you a little bit about devolution. You'll hear about devolution to local government. The government is giving local areas powers to spend different budgets differently. We're asking permission to have all of the health and justice monies that are currently available through NHS England to fund things like the police custody services in police stations, the offenders with complex needs service, the drug testing on arrest provision. We're hoping to get all of that money locally so that we can build a system around health and justice which will absolutely overlap with the work you're doing, because it is so aligned, and we need to make sure it is aligned, and we can make sure it's aligned by having control locally. Longer term national funding, as I said, some of those budgets are time limited and we're hoping to make sure that they are longer term. Comprehensive spending review is just a 3-year process that the government goes through of setting departmental budgets. And at the comprehensive spending review allocates the money that we get. So we're hoping to influence that. And of course we've got the spectre of a general election in a year's time, possibly. I was going to say hopefully then, but I shouldn't pass political opinions. And I've said we need to keep exploring PCC monies. But that's a very, very brief rattle through what commissioning is. It's that understand, if you can just get, and I have to bash this into my colleagues' heads as other commissioners, because they still think it's buying stuff. But it is about understanding need and making sure the need is met by mobilising the resources that you have direct control over or the ability to influence. That's it. That's commissioning. Done, dusted. There's a bit more yet. But it is that it's making things better, building relationships, making systems work smarter, making more efficient use of resources to ultimately address the needs as they are identified. And that's your job coming up. Should you wish to accept it, Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible styly. So we've had the break. So we did the money. So where does it all go in Essex? That's what it's been. That's what it's designed to develop. Now that's quite an old diagram, and Sarah's grimacing. Because we need to simplify that, because that was for us to understand it and for us to give to other people, not the general public, because this is what health like to look at. We love to see a system map. It is relatively simple if you break it down, because you come in, either self-referral, referred by a third party, so mum, dad, brother, sister, friend, some sort of identification and brief advice, maybe you've seen a therapist or whatever, hospital, other non-specialists, so social care, other medical profession, could be a GP, or you've been arrested. And you come in. And we've always said we expect to see no wrong doors. So wherever you turn up, they should never say, and this is the bit about working with services and trying to get them together, they should never say, oh no, you shouldn't be here, you need to go down the road. Because the minute that person steps out of that door, it's like, oh, sod that then. It's damn sight easier to go and get a drink or use. So they should never say, you need to go down the road. And the first thing a service should say is, do you want a cup of coffee? You're right. Are you cold? Are you wet? Not, so what drugs do you use then and how many? Because that's just dreadful. And this is where we need to do commissioning. When I first came to Essex years ago to start supporting the development of the treatment system, I went up to Colchester, where NEDAS used to be. I don't know who's been around long enough to remember NEDAS. And I walked down the little back roads and I walked into the NEDAS front office in a suit with a briefcase, and there was a glass partition and there was an office with administrators sat behind, and I stood there for probably 10 minutes before somebody looked up and said, yes, what do you want? I thought, okay. I'm not a service user, I'm not in need of treatment, but if I had been, I'd have buggered off 5 minutes ago. And this is what I mean by commissioning. This is where commissioning is not about contracts, it's not about meeting a provider and ticking a box and going. It's about getting out there and saying to the services, drop the glass screens. They're not going to punch you. Drop the attitude. Welcome them in. Don't say drugs or alcohol. Because if it's one or the other, you might have to go it's like and this is where working with you, working together, working with the providers, we can change this. Because it's the old story of the GP's waiting room, innit, and the GP's, receptionists. We don't want that for drug and alcohol users. If health want to keep that for GP surgeries, fine and dandy. We do not want that for our service users. Because we want everybody to feel welcomed, supported and cared about. Even if you'd have gone in there, had a cup of coffee, not necessarily talked about what your problems are,
Because you didn't know what kind of state I was in.
yeah. I mean, I'm not saying. Yeah,
Yeah, but I was desperate
yeah.
to like go and hunt for this place myself.
So actually, if somebody had said, sit down, let's have a chat. Okay, I can't actually get you to see a worker today, but come in tomorrow. But let's have a chat and let's work out how you are and let's settle you down. This is the system. So we have STARS, community rehab, open road Phoenix Futures. We have Phoenix Futures offenders with complex needs. There's collaborative care with GPs, although less and less and less of that nowadays because GPs don't want to know. Supervised consumption, but some of that will change because we're now bringing Buvidal into the mix, so we can do a lot more work around Buvidal. So this is quite old, and I'm sort of quite keen not to update it until you've done your bit, because actually we'd be changing it and then changing it again. So I'm sort of quite keen not to get too into the weeds of this, but just to basically say that what we want to fund is simple access, appropriate assessment, appropriate support system so that people can wait well, and the appropriate services that when that wait is over, they get the right provision. And also and there's a very good reason why we've done it like this and not done it in blocks of that, because I don't think anybody needs to follow a pathway, because you and people in this system are suffering from a chronic and relapsing condition. And what we don't want is people to go along a pathway, relapse and have to go back round again. This should all be available at the same time, at whatever intensity is required at that time. So it's not a linear pathway.
My issue has been after all this has been done and released.
You stay in here, and this is, Lawrence and I were talking about this. As far as I'm concerned, you may leave treatment, so formal structured treatment, but you could stay in the system as long as you want. But we have to create a system that people want to stay in and that is for them and that isn't about attending appointments. It is about, 2 years down the line being able to drop in and chat to somebody when you want to, just to be able to reinforce that recovery, reinforce that positive messaging, reinforce the it's all right.
I've been very lucky. This
Yeah,
time round, and
yeah,
I've had that additional support
yeah.
following on.
And I think things have got better than they were 10 years ago. I think we have got more of that visible recovery. But my God, we need to work on this.
To be honest, yeah, the service I've been using previous hasn't got that.
No.
But I've managed to get seen by Phoenix and
Yeah. And the other thing is, sometimes I don't think it's about, and this is where I go back to, these aren't our clients, these aren't ePuts clients, they're not Phoenix Futures clients, they're not Open Roads clients, they're Essex residents. So if we can stop seeing all of these things as competitive blocks, if we can stop seeing that, if we can start bringing them together to work much more collaboratively, if we can reduce the possibility that they might lose their contract, so they're going to have to compete, that there might be a re-tendering process, so they might lose their jobs. If we can reduce all that, so all of these things work as a system, we stop that idea that, Phoenix haven't got any aftercare, or Open Road haven't got any aftercare, or Forward Trust haven't got any aftercare. The system has all the aftercare, and I hate the phrase aftercare, we talked about this. Continuation of care, recovery support. If we can build that big block, so that actually when people either leave or drop out, because we've got to remember it's a chronic and relapsing condition, they're still held in the safety net of this box. They don't disappear. So what does it fund? So we have choices. The Children's Society and Open Road working together, all age recovery coordination and specialist harm reduction, drug psychosocial interventions, needle and syringe, young people's drug and alcohol, you can see it all there. We have also just recently funded some additional posts to link into children's social care. Because what we forget is that sometimes drug users are known to other organisations. And in children's social care, sometimes they really don't want to tell people they've got a drug or alcohol problem because they're frightened of having their children taken off them. They won't, always. They sometimes will. But then they may need to for the safety of the children. But if we can work more effectively with children's social care, we can get those parents into treatment, support the children, and effectively keep the family together, if possible, and safely. So we've just funded some additional capacity around that. Because we have to remember that there are people who won't access treatment for very, very varying reasons. We've got the alcohol recovery community provided by Phoenix. They adult alcohol recovery coordination, specialist harm reduction, adult psychosocial, and they provide the A&E links to all of the hospitals in the county. We have recently just formalised this because Open Road used to provide, there used to be a confusion about if somebody presented with drugs and alcohol, who took them? And we said, it doesn't really matter, just welcome them in, sort it out after that individual's been engaged, sort out who's going to lead, but just welcome them in. So we've started, and this goes back to your points earlier about keeping the services together, working better, blah. Specialist Treatment and Recovery Service from EPUT, the STARS service, substitute and ameliorative prescribing, community and home detox, access to inpatient detox and residential rehab because they chair the panel to which applications are made around rehab and detox. They have 2 parental and family practitioners who work with children's social care, who should be working with the 2 posts from the Children's Society, and we have, they're here. And they should be working together to make sure that children's social care and parents where there's a drug and alcohol issue are engaged. And it was something we'd always wanted social care to fund. And we'd waited long enough, so we decided to fund it ourselves. We'll get social care in there one day. There's then SHARP, community recovery, something that was a dream that I'd had for years, and Nick Barton, who was the previous chief executive of Action on Addiction when it was Cloud's House, he and I had always dreamt about having a community rehab, and that's where that came from. We piloted that in Braintree, and we now have the 2 locations across the county. There is a lot of interest because we know that Southend and Thurrock also refer into SHARP. There's other interest from Suffolk and Hertfordshire and our other bordering counties, so there may be some opportunities to set up another SHARP in another location so we can co-own it with neighbouring areas, but that's for the future. Moving parents and children together is a programme they should be delivering, but again are struggling with, really struggling with, and we need to get that delivered properly.
Just recruited.
Eh?
They've just recruited.
Yes, yeah. Futures in Mind is current. I'll explain what's going to happen to that. Befriending, mentoring and recovery support needs to be far closer to the community, but there's a solution to that we're thinking about, and we need to engage with you on the 3rd stage. And that's how, now people say the system is really complicated. It is a lot of providers, and we do need to do some work on making it easier to get into, and we do need to work on the issues of welcoming and first steps and waiting well and all of that sort of stuff. But this is what we send to GPs, and they forget within about, a nanosecond of receiving it. Because actually, drugs or young people, phone that number. Alcohol, phone that number. That's it. That's as complicated as it is to get in. But our services sometimes make it more complicated, and other professionals just stick their head in the sand. I was going to say something else then. Just stick their head in their sand and say, oh no, it's really complicated. I don't know what to do. Phone those numbers.
They don't always pick up.
I did say our services make it complicated sometimes.
Because that's why I had to
Yeah.
go thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
Going through the door because
Yeah.
I kept ringing
Yeah.
and ringing and leaving messages.
Yep.
And no one was getting back to me.
And I say our services sometimes make it difficult, but it should not be difficult because that's it. Holly. Gambling. There is a new gambling service that has just been commissioned by NHS England that is going to be for the Eastern region, whose headquarters is located in Thurrock. Inclusions, because the regional service is being delivered by Inclusions.
So does that mean that this will never be responsible for anything to do with behavioural addictions? It's all going to go through.
Unless you can find the money. I am not going to divert drug and alcohol money away from the drug and alcohol population, because the minute we include gambling, waiting lists will shoot through the roof, caseloads will get even bigger, and we cannot cope with the current demand.
Understood, but is it not just coming under an addiction umbrella?
Yeah, of course it is,
Create
yeah.
separation?
Absolutely.
So then is the funding from public health then for gambling?
No, the funding is for illicit drugs and alcohol.
No, for where's gambling funding coming from?
NHS England,
Right, okay, cool.
not public health.
Right.
If they give me the money, I'd love to fund some additional capacity.
It's just an interesting
Yeah.
distinction.
But we also don't fund sex addiction services.
Yeah.
We don't fund services, as I said earlier, for prescription-only medications or over-the-counter medications. If the NHS come and join us and bring their money with them, we can enhance this current system to address the needs of Zopiclone, prescribed opiates, la 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 la. But they won't, go back to my slide, health contributes nothing to this agenda. The STARS contract is my single biggest contract spend. Obviously, there are 3 consultant psychiatrists and doctors, there are lots of prescribing nurses, and there's a significant drugs budget. Because it has to be safe, it has to be measured and monitored by medical professionals, and it's why in Essex we like to keep it with an NHS provider, because it sits in a much bigger clinical governance framework. Some other areas have got CGL and Forward Trust doing their prescribing services, and they are fine, right up until there's a major problem. And there was a major problem a couple of years ago because buprenorphine, Subutex, the price of that went through the roof. STARS swallowed that within their wider drugs costs because it was a tiny blip in their drug cost budget. A private sector, third sector prescribing provision elsewhere suddenly saw their prices rocket and couldn't swallow it within anything else. I never got an approach from EPUT around the cost of Subutex because it didn't even register in their wider budgets because they could make savings elsewhere. So these are the sort of horrible discussions that sometimes you'd have to have internally about, I've got to say no to somebody. And that's horrible. That's a hideous moment to make a decision. But you make it on the basis that you understand there is support, but people have to start accessing it appropriately. And you'll be making those decisions with us. And we'll be helping you to make the right decisions for people. Because we have to think at the end of this, there is a person or a family, and we have to make those decisions right. Sorry, that was another. So that's, yeah. But I think there is work to do. I really think there is work to do, and I think this is the quick win. These are the quick wins that we can achieve together about making this easier, about making access to the system simpler, about making your first step over the threshold more welcoming, about keeping people in the system to support them, even when they're having a really bad moment. And nobody really likes them at the moment because they're arseholes. Sorry. Because we've all arseholes at times. Me too. But we need to work, and I think this is where the work can generate positive outcomes with ERF really positively, really quickly. Oh, and sorry, that's just another one at the bottom there. I don't know if everybody knows about the Essex Wellbeing Service. The Essex Wellbeing Service was commissioned by my colleagues in public health, and it's basically the front door to every single other public health provision. So stop smoking services, weight management services, NHS health check services, sexual health services. It's the gateway to everything else. So basically, if you've got those 3 numbers, you can access the public health offer in Essex. But we need to make it smarter, more welcoming, more accessible, more client-focused, more of everything. So that people who have to wait, and we have waiting lists and waiting times in our services. They're nowhere near the NHS waiting times. We were set targets many years ago to get our waiting times down to 3 weeks for first appointment. We're pretty much there, and in fact, in some cases, with an emergency, you can get access very quickly. But we need to make it better, smarter, warmer, more welcoming. I'm shouldering some of the blame now. You're having some of this. But this is where responsibility of commissioning comes. So in addition, what else do we fund? We have a complex needs service provided by Phoenix Futures. At the moment, we are out to the market to re-tender that. We did not take this decision lightly. It's been in operation for 7 years. Things have changed in the system so much that we wanted to go to the market to test the market because we felt that there possibly would be other organisations that may be interested in looking at this. Not saying that Phoenix are bad, they are not, they're phenomenally good, but we need to test the market. I am absolutely hoping and praying that Phoenix win the contract, but we're going through a process to test it because there may be somebody out there that can go, no, we're better than you. If you take a decision, if we, in 5 years' time, we come to the conclusion that you lot and us, as your commissioning support unit, feel that we have a really good system, but we are missing something. Or we want to really, you can flex contracts and specifications a bit during the PSR, provider select. But if you want to make a really seismic change, if all of a sudden Phoenix Futures and Open Road fall out, can't work together, whatever efforts you make, they will not work together, they hate each other, clients are experiencing significant barriers to support and treatment, and you've done everything you can, it might be that moment when you go, do you know what? We could reframe this contract, we could bring these two services together, we could go out and test the market and see if somebody could do a better job. And at that point, you then do some market engagement, you bring in all the providers that might want to do it, you encourage the small third sector organisations, voluntary sector organisations to get together and maybe bid for it together. You just stimulate some interest in the market, and then you formally launch the tender and see who, stand back and hold your breath and hope that somebody bids. And that's how you would do that. Yeah. So and what we're doing is, Futures in Mind, the peer-led stuff that I mentioned earlier on, is going to, hello Joe, you've been interviewed. Futures in Mind is going to be incorporated into that complex needs service because we want lived experience closer to the delivery of that peer-led, mutual aid, peer mentoring support for complex needs. Now Nathan has been involved as the service, as the lived experience lead with the Changing Futures agenda, which has led us to do this. And we want to start involving the charity. It's not a contract that longer term you would maybe have total control over because it is about drugs and alcohol, mental health, homelessness, learning disabilities and criminal engagement with the criminal justice system. But it is something that you need to be really closely aligned to and involved in the development of. But it's a budget that I hold separate to the 14.5 million. The fingers crossed moment, and this is a real fingers crossed moment because we have to go through an open and honest process, as we bloody well should, is that our hope is that Phoenix Futures bid is the only bid that's of any worth and that nobody else comes anywhere close. So we have to hold our breath a little bit as commissioners because you might get somebody come in and, and absolutely blow your mind and it's like, wow, we want that. You do have to also guard against the shiny presentation of what looks good versus what their experience is like and what they've delivered in the past. And it's even more important. So when you do a job interview, you submit your application and you also identify 2 references. And most organisations appoint you and then get references. When you're doing something like this for a £2.5 million a year contract, you take up references quite early. You want to know if somebody has said they've done a really good job. You want to speak to their previous commissioner and find out if they really have done a good job, because you're going to be spending a lot of money replacing an organisation that currently delivers really well, and you don't want to make a mistake. So we go through quite a lot of process around that. So it's horrible. I hate having to re-tender services because we've developed a really long-term relationship with these providers. And certainly Phoenix around the complex needs agenda is a superb service. But we felt that we needed to go to the market because they're a superb service in our understanding. There might be somebody else out there who can blow them apart. I don't think so. but it's a moment. So Topaz unit, some of you will be aware of Topaz unit, some of you have been in the Topaz unit. Topaz is a medically managed detox unit at Broomfield Hospital, alongside Broomfield Hospital. We commission it on behalf of the Eastern region. Sarah started it, and it's now been taken over by her replacement. Sarah had great fun. It is a medically managed detox unit. People in the industry don't get this. My colleagues don't get this. A medically managed detox unit is a unit where if you have a medical emergency, it can be dealt with there and then. Not by calling an ambulance to somewhere like Passmore's, which is very good, and other places that provide detox, but it is a unit where it is managed by medics and has 24/7 access to medical support. So we've commissioned the Topaz unit. It's a brand new resource for the Eastern region. It's 4 beds at the moment, possibly 6. Although there's an umming and ahhing about that, and I'll let you know later. But it's a medically managed detox unit, the first of its kind in the Eastern region. Really happy to have it. It has saved people's lives. And will continue to save people's lives, because the referrals to that are people who are really unwell and who would invariably be blue lighted to hospital had it not been for the Topaz unit. So that's really important. Specialist housing, homeless and rough sleeping support. We've had that new money that I mentioned. We've now got the drug and alcohol support service for rough sleepers across the county. We've got more support around homelessness prevention. There is also a service delivered by Open Road called the Individual Placement and Support Service, IPS. It's about getting people job ready. It's about providing support to get people job ready, because again, housing, employment, care, love, all things that we really need, should be available. Risk Avert. Now I know that when people when people start in active recovery and they start becoming evangelical about recovery, they want to go and tell people not to use drugs. And quite often as a service user, they want to go into schools and tell young people not to use drugs. There is no evidence, and I mean no evidence, that that has any impact upon anybody's drug using behaviour in their future. None. In fact, the only evidence that exists says that sending drug users into schools increases the likelihood that those young people will use drugs, because it glamorises it. Because they will look at you and say, well, you're all right now. What's the problem? What we developed was a service called Risk Avert, and it's been running for 10 years now. We've had it evaluated by the University of Bath, the University of Gloucester, every year for the last 10 years, and we've also funded a PhD study into its effectiveness through Essex University, and we have proved that it works. It is an educational package that is delivered in schools by school staff who have been trained to deliver it, and it is about behaviour, not about drug use. It's about training people's minds about their approach to risk, be it online risk, be it drugs and alcohol risk, be it crime risk. It is a superb package that is evidence-based. 77% of young people who engage with the Risk Avert process report improvements in their self-efficacy, resilience, and risk-taking behaviour management. If you want to get involved in educational support for young people, please do get involved, but get involved appropriately, where it can be delivered properly. Because it's very well-meaning of people. I absolutely get it that people want to change the world, but let's change it properly. Theseus, very important. We'll probably manage a lot of that, because that is that's the web-based case management. Oh, there we go. I'm getting into technical blah, blah, blah now. Every service will enter your details on a computer and ask you if you're happy to share your data. We have to share your data. Well, as long as you give consent, we have to share your data with the National Drug Treatment Monitoring System, which makes sure that we are monitoring performance nationally. It keeps us getting the budget that we get. The Theseus is the case management system that all of our services are required to use, because it is a system that can share information between Open Road, ePut, Theseus, Phoenix and Sharp. And it means that you shouldn't have to be assessed to death. It means that you shouldn't have to go through an assessment every time you go to a new service, because they should be able to. If you get referred from Open Road to Stars, they will open up your record, and Stars and Open Road can jointly see your record. Theory. We'll keep working on it, and it does, it works. It means people don't have to fax or email or post or carrier pigeon your record, by which time somebody's sat you down and gone, so I'm going to assess your need, and you're sitting there thinking, they did that down the road a week ago, why am I doing it again? And you can build a record rather than repeat a record. We commission that, and we contractually require all of our providers to use it. We're trying really hard to fend off Essex County Council because they keep saying, oh, you need to re-procure this because it's been in place for 5 years. It's like, yeah, we know. And we want to keep it that way, thank you. So we'll keep that going until you tell us it's shite and there's a better one. Drink Coach is an app that we fund, teeny tiny amount of money, but it provides access to the audit score so that people can test their own issues around alcohol. It also provides access to some online counselling around alcohol that we fund. And if we'll keep an eye on it, and if it starts building that we need more capacity, we can fund some additional capacity, or we can look at different approaches locally. But Drink Coach exists. Naloxone. Are you all aware of naloxone? It's an opiate antagonist, thank you. Opiates, and if somebody overdoses, squirt up their nose, if it's opiates, we'll bring them out of the overdose, and they will need to be monitored. We are funding naloxone to be carried by probation staff. We are hoping to have it carried by the police, Open Road staff, Stars staff, other staff. As many people as possible need to have naloxone on their person because it will save lives. We know from work with Norfolk Constabulary, Suffolk Constabulary and Hertfordshire and Peterborough and Cambridgeshire that the police there have already saved numerous lives by administering naloxone. We have a slightly resistant Chief Constable, but we're working on him. The police themselves, PCs on the ground, are desperate to carry it. We obviously fund Essex Recovery Foundation and will continue to do so. Some of the public health team are funded by our grant, so a tiny bit of my salary, tiny bit of Ryan's salary, tiny bit of Emma's salary are funded out of the public health grant, but it's not a great deal of money and will exist anyway. We are also looking at, one of the things that we're missing in Essex is formal psychological oversight of our treatment programs and treatment interventions to ensure that they are psychologically appropriate. Now, we've been thinking long and hard about that. We've identified some money for this, but we don't want to put it with one service. We want the whole system to be able to access this resource to test the appropriateness of their psychological input. So at the moment, we're talking to Essex University about whether Essex University, through the Institute of Public Health, would host these positions because they also need effective supervision, ongoing management, and it's quite a specialist function. It's one thing we've been missing in Essex for years. So we will continue to do that, again, unless you tell us one day that's shite, we don't want it. Again, I may advise that it's possibly useful, but we can work on how useful. We are also getting some match funding from the wider public health grant, so we can look at having 2 posts, so they will keep an eye on the psychological input into drug and alcohol services, but also look at behaviour change models around smoking cessation, sexual health, and the rest of the public health agenda. But that will be additional money, not our money. Our money will fund that very specific drug and alcohol focus. So that's sort of where £14.5 million goes. But as we can see from the discussions we had there is an enormous amount of leeway and flexibility to flex this system without spending any more money. So the big job is the 3-point plan that you identified, which is mapping what's there, identifying possible procurement routes, but also monitoring and improving and supporting. That is the biggest job. And it's the most important and also probably the most fun, because you can actually see the outcomes of your activity fairly quickly. Just getting co-location of services will make a difference to people. Being able to turn up at one premises, having spaces in local areas where people can drop in for a supportive chat will make such a difference. And that's not going to take loads and loads of new money. That's going to take loads and loads of work. But it's the important work and the really exciting, because all the rest of it's just blah. It's a lot of noise. And what we're aiming to do as the commissioning support unit to you is remove some of the noise so you can get on and do the important stuff and the useful stuff that's going to make a change, and that you can see the change quite rapidly, because you'll see the change in the feedback you get from the community, from yourselves and your wider community, because you'll see the difference. You'll experience the difference. It'll feel better. And that's where you'll start getting real bang for very little buck, actually. Here we go, procurement, blah, blah, blah. Most contracts are let on a 5+2 basis. We're going for 5+2+2 now. The council don't like 9-year contracts, so we break it into this ridiculous language of 5+2+2. So it means after 5 years we have to ask permission to go for another 2, and then after the next 2 we have to ask permission to go for the next 2. It means we've got a 9-year contract. But we have to go back to Cabinet, our political masters, which is right and proper because we're spending public money, to ask permission to extend. But we will always go to the market, so the market knows that we're letting a 5+2 or a 5+2+2 contract. It's semantics. But it does mean at 5 years, we have a formal point where we could say, Jesus, they're shite. We're not going to extend. Sorry? All right, okay. It does allow for a degree of stability, because as I said, we used to let 3-year contracts, and it was this endless rotation of service starts, service operates, service prepares to go. And there was no stability around staff, around continuity of care, around anything, and it used to be dreadful. All of our contracts still have annual break clauses in them. So if the government suddenly turned around and said, oh, I haven't got any money left, we can't give you any money, we can give services a year's notice. And ultimately, if a service is performing badly, and we can evidence it as commissioners, all of us, we can give them notice anyway. Because if it's really bad, and we've done everything we can to try to make it good, and it's still bad, why would we keep paying them? You issue notice based upon poor performance. There is a process you have to go through. So you issue performance notices, you then issue a final performance notice, and then you issue notice. But we can get rid of really bad. However, and this is where I fall out with some of my colleagues at the County Council and elsewhere, if it's that bad, some of the blame lies here, because we haven't done enough to make it better. And we have a shared responsibility for really bad. And I'll absolutely take that on the chin, because if it's that bad, we haven't done our job. All of us. We've tried, because we have multiple providers, we try not to let the contracts all at the same time, because we don't want to go through the nuclear option every 5 years of letting the whole system as one. Because as I said, performance drops off. If you let everybody's contract at the same time, all of a sudden, everybody would be in fear of their jobs, and every service would be preparing to leave. And then you'd spend another year with every service rebuilding itself. So we try to let them on a bit of a staggered basis. But again, this is going to be part of the review that we do as part of the 3-point plan. We need to look at what they call, another bullshit phrase, contract liquidity. It just means when a contract starts and when it finishes. But we want to maintain some stability in the system. And as I said, performance always drops pre and post procurement, always. No exceptions. Reprocurement is not always the solution to poor performance. In fact, it is rarely the solution to poor performance. It's lazy. It's lazy commissioning. A service isn't performing, we'll re-procure it. No, do some bloody work with them. Support them to make it better. Don't blame them. It is really lazy commissioning, I think, to just say, oh, it's shite, we'll get rid of them. Why is it shite? Why is it not working? Because possibly we haven't all done the job that we should be doing of making it better. And as I say, the system in Essex is designed to bring the best of all organisations together. So the NHS and the voluntary and community service working together, but it has to work together. You can do it with some contractual requirements, but you have to build relationships. Having multiple providers does enable us to bring the best of all organisations together, and there is some risk in having just one organisation delivering all of it. I have a lot of colleagues I chair the English Substance Use Commissioners Group nationally, and I have a lot of colleagues across the country who have let their whole system to one provider. They have God's own job trying to mend bits of it. Because organisations get very, very clever at hiding problems and having problems crop up with one bit and then solving that bit, and it's whack-a-mole. It's commissioning whack-a-mole. And they are practiced in making sure that the right moles stay down at the right time. But again, I will leave this up to you. We will leave this up to you. You will make a decision. If you decide all of a sudden. However, what I would say is, don't forget, you can have a single specification for the whole service in Essex, still delivered by multiple providers who are contractually required to work together. And you can require them to co-locate. You can require them to work together. You can require them to share data. All of these things can be done because as commissioners, it's down to you to make the decisions. You don't have to have one provider to make it simple. You can require them to all call. I mean, we tried it years ago and it failed miserably. Choices was the name that at the time service users chose for the services provided by the Children's Society and Open Road. Because they didn't give a monkeys whether it was the Open Road or the Children's Society, it's an all-age provision. So service users said, we want it called Choices. And then Open Road and the Children's Society both said, oh yeah, but we'd lose our identity and we need to keep people aware of our identity. So we need to have Open Road providing choices. And we got bored of the argument in the end, and then I lost my team, and then, anyway, we went through a bureaucratic change at Essex County Council, and you're not interested. So we lost the battle. So they're still called Open Road and the Children's Society. If you want to call the whole system the Essex Drug and Alcohol Partnership, and everybody has to call themselves a provider of the Essex Drug and Alcohol Partnership, contract them to do it. And sod their bloody corporate names. Sorry.
It's starting to happen anyway.
Yeah, it is.
It is starting to happen.
It's starting to happen because people are co-locating, and actually you can't put on the front door of a drug services, you can't have everybody's logo because it looks messy and unusual and weird. So it's absolutely down to us together to say, no, that's what we want it called. We want it to call the Essex, and I'm not saying EDAP, please don't call it the Essex Recovery Partnership. But it's down to you to say, sorry, Open Road, you might be Open Road, but actually ultimately your biggest funder is us. And we are saying, for this provision, you will be called X. And you will operate as part of this partnership. So it doesn't need to be one provider. It can be an umbrella provision that they all provide their bit of. And it is happening, it's starting to happen. So we haven't lost the battle completely. Yeah, there we go. So there is a risk at having one provider. They can, and also some areas have delegated all their responsibilities as commissioning to that provider. So they've given it all the budget and said, you commissioned this bit, you commissioned that bit, and then stepped back and just sort of gone and watched. And really that to me is about slopey shoulders and giving somebody else all the responsibility for it. It's about working together. And I think it's got to be about working together. Commissioning, working together, systems change. So why do we have to have a treatment system like this? We have to deliver a balanced treatment system. That is a condition of grant. We have to. You can't get away from it, and actually I'm not sure you'd want to, because all of that is necessary. It has to be all age. You might want to commission very separate young people services. We haven't, because actually the trouble was when we did have it that way, everybody got to 18 and suddenly they were cured, amazingly. And they didn't get into adult services because that transition was a gap where people fell immediately down the gap. So we've brought it together by bringing the Children's Society and Open Road together. We have never had I'm going to hesitate and say never. We have pretty much never had a person under 18 requiring significant prescribing provision. And anyway, it would be EAP STARS working with the young people's mental health services to ensure that that was managed appropriately. We have to make sure the broadest range of needs are addressed. We have to. And everybody's needs are different. We've talked about that a lot this morning. It is for alcohol and illicit drugs. Opiates, crack, stimulants, etc. Not prescription only, not over the counter. Although we will support it. Harm reduction has to be a key element of this whole system. Has to be. Because harm reduction, abstinence, part of the same journey. Part of the same offer. So drug-related death prevention, needle and syringe, bloodborne virus prevention, safer using, drug testing one day maybe, but we'll see. Psychosocial interventions, so therapies, we have to provide brief interventions, extended brief interventions, and low-level to intensive interventions to support people. I would hesitate, and I am a qualified counsellor, I would hesitate and hold back on suggesting that every drug user needs counselling. They need some psychosocial intervention. Counselling is a very different intervention. You may need bereavement counselling, you may need other forms of counselling around your use. But drug and alcohol counselling is a very specialist intervention. Just putting it out there. We have to have pharmacological and medical interventions because it has to be safe. You can't detox on your Todd. Well, you can, but it's not very nice and quite often dangerous. We have to provide access to residential and inpatient services. Have to. It's a requirement of the grant. We need to support recovery, and we need to provide recovery support, sometimes referred to as aftercare. I bloody hate aftercare as a phrase. It is not aftercare, it's ongoing support. It always used to be treated as aftercare and therefore became an afterthought. And it very rarely got funded. And it was always, the community will deal with that. Peer-led and delivered support. We have to engage with service users and lived experience, which is the lever that we've used to create this. Because we have to do it. So, happy days. Everything we provide has to be evidence-based or evidence-informed. Going back to your point about innovation, Sally, what we can't do is rely on the historical evidence base all the time, because there has to be an ability to test things, try new approaches. Community rehab was a new approach. There was no evidence to say it would work, but the evidence suggested it would. So we tried it and built on the evidence, and now there is the evidence to show it works. So it has to be evidence-based or evidence-informed. It has to be clinically safe. It has to be available and accessible, and this is where you come in and the work that the three-point plan is going to enable us to do. And it has to be free at the point of need. It has to follow the NHS principle that it is free at the point of need. We are also, close your ears, less picky about where your GP is registered. The NHS will get very picky about which GP you're registered and where you can access care. As far as we're concerned, if you live in Essex, you can access these services. And we have moments where we have discussions about that at the borders, but we'll get round that one. So those are have-tos and why we have a system that provides everything we have, and what I will always pull you back to if you decide that you want to send all drug users to Spain for a holiday. Not suggesting you would, but although Neil Thomas would go with you because he's always after a holiday, member of my team, who always says that if he saved money on a contract, can he go on holiday with it? Joking, just in case that was filmed. It is complicated. And I make no apology for the fact that it's complicated. It is not as complicated as trying to access the NHS. Jeez, I mean, that is complicated. But I think it often just seems complicated. And we have a responsibility to simplify that and make it accessible to people. Because, and we'll take complete blame for this, as professionals, we like to make things seem difficult and very professional because it makes us feel better about how good we are at our jobs. It's not complicated and we can make it simpler, and we bloody have to. It needs to be easy to access without reducing it to poor delivery, and that's the balance. We have to make it accessible, but let's not drop the quality. And you can do both. You can do both. Joint working, it has to be about all of us working together, and this is now the start of where we bring the community in to start working with us. The behaviour of the system will be modelled from above. It will be modelled by us as the commissioners, and if we start behaving badly and kicking off and all the rest of it, then the system will follow. It's not, I'm not a parent, but I'm guessing it's like parenting. If you model bad behaviour, your children will behave badly. We have to drive joint working out across the system. We have to drive it out. We have to really, really model the joint working and then drive that process and philosophy out across the system. And we have to hold providers to account for any barriers. And this is your job. This is where your experience is going to come in. All of your experiences and the wider community experience will come in holding providers to account for any barriers or blocks that they put in, deliberately or not. We have to drive that out of the system and hold providers to account for making things easier. And there are opportunities with you leading this. I think there are massive opportunities with you leading this. I think I go back to the comment I made about Nathan and the dual diagnosis comment. It's very difficult to argue with somebody who can say, no, this was my experience. Oh, well, it's not like that now. Well, it was 5 weeks ago. It's really difficult to argue with that. Really difficult. So I think there is a massive opportunity to make those changes to that system, to shift the way of working in our services and to shift the approach where it needs to be to make it better and to make it what people need. Do we want to... Is lunch ready? Because I'm going to go on to monitoring and all that malarkey next, and we could get tied up in conversations around that forever.
Lunch, is it?
Lunch. I'm so glad somebody else said that. I thank you so much for listening and thank you so much for engaging. It is an awful lot to take in, and as I said, this can form 9 months of a postgraduate qualification. Monitoring it. It's all about the monitoring and how you do it. We have done it by building relationships with our providers. We don't have, across the table, big stick contract monitoring meetings where we whip them for not achieving 20 of that or 10 of this. We have a performance monitoring review system, which is a conversation. You remember Theseus I mentioned, the case management system? I can look at data on your behalf on a daily basis if I want to. I don't need them to report on performance around data because I can look at it on a daily basis for each service if I want to. So our performance monitoring system is about, have you spent all your money where we should be spending it? And okay, now let's have a conversation about good stuff and bad stuff, blockages and barriers. Now, we've conducted that over a period of time. We've developed that process over a period of time. But as I said, I have to take what they tell me at face value. You bring the human context to it, as you said. You bring the human context to it. Because you can sit there when they say, and we've implemented this new process, and you can go, really? Have you? Because our feedback would suggest not. Or you can say, well, actually, you've implemented that. What the community is saying, could you do that and a bit more of this? And it's all about that conversation, it's all about that relationship, and it's not about beating anybody with a big stick. It's backed up by access to data, National Drug Treatment Monitoring System through Theseus, as I mentioned. We can look at it on a daily basis in detail. And this is so important. I was going to put this on a separate slide. Our approach is about relational contracting. We're trying to shift away from this transactional, we give you money, you tell us you've delivered 50. We give you some more money, you tell us you've delivered 75 of it. Really? It's got to be about relational contracting, which is a formal process that you have to go through if you want to have pure relational contracting. Essex County Council would go off on one. So we have a relational contracting approach, which is about flexible and adaptable working at all times, over time. Being able to flex provision, being able to agree that we have an approach that flexes to meet need over time. Less prescriptive, because the environment within which we all are operating changes. And the last 3 years has been a really good example of how things change. Because at the beginning of COVID, we had to go, scrap that specification, we need to do something different. Less adversarial and transactional. We have to agree that we all have mutual and aligned goals and aims. Because we do. We just have got a bit warped about how it's done. Collaboration and trust. I have enough trust with my providers, and we do, don't we? And Sarah will back me up on this. Our providers email me at the end of each financial year with their underspend. And they tell me, here's our underspend. It's normally 30, 40 grand. It's normally because they've had a delay in recruiting staff, so they haven't been able to spend all their money. And they will then send me an email and saying, our intention is to spend it on this in the coming year. We have a conversation, and we'll include you in that conversation going forward. We email them back and say, I don't want the money back, because if I take it back, I've got to give it back to government. Keep the money, and yes, we agree with your spend plans, or no, we don't, we'd rather you did this with it. Previously, what they used to do is hide their underspends because they were in fear of getting it taken back from them. We've built it so nowadays they tell me what it is, and we're open and honest about it, because actually it can be reinvested then. It doesn't disappear into their corporate coffers, it actually gets spent in Essex. And that's about trust. So we have a sort of open book accounting process. And we have to develop shared principles, and this will definitely be part of the 3-point plan about developing those principles and ideas and shared goals and outcomes. We have to recognise also that things won't always go right. Heaven forbid, things go wrong at times. Not in my office, obviously, because we're perfect. Things will go wrong. Things will go, unfortunately, badly wrong sometimes, and we have to deal with it. Because we have to have a learning environment. Because if we don't acknowledge the wrong, we'll never change it to get it right. And that goes right the way to drug-related deaths. And we have panels and processes around reviewing every drug-related death so we can learn as a system, very openly, not blaming anybody, shit happens.
Use them as opportunities to grow and learn.
We have to. Because if we don't, we'll hide bad news and we'll end up like some local authorities. Skint. And doing all the wrong things. And we have to learn from those mistakes, but if we're not open and honest about mistakes being made and recognising they will be made, we'll not learn. And we need to learn from all of these experiences that we've heard about today. Yes, 10 years ago that would have happened. 5 years ago that would have happened. If it's still happening in 5 weeks' time, we need to do something about it. But we need to do something about it positively and working together and making things better. Because the minute you start saying, you did it wrong, I would, dig in, no I didn't. So it's that learning environment, no blame, a desire to change. The role of ERF. Your role is as commissioners. in the widest sense of the word, as I've outlined throughout this, as system leaders, system developers, as those people who can affect change, as the people developing the approach across the county, as people informing the way that things can be delivered and framed, as people ultimately at certain points in this whole process who will decide where money is spent, but also as people who are developing the wider system and bringing the resources in to enhance the delivery that is provided to people who need those support. You will be involved in every element of the commissioning cycle, where you want to be, and where Lawrence feels it's appropriate and where you feel it's appropriate. Because it's not on anybody's singular head. That's the whole point. You're closer to the community than we are. Much closer. So who better to build a picture of need? Who can better define the required outcomes than the community itself? Who can assess and drive what works most appropriately? And who can support us all to make it accessible and available where it's required? But it does come with a degree of responsibility. And this is the doom crier bit in me. It's not just about you and your journey. And I mean that individually. Those experiences are absolutely vital and really important to developing services, but it cannot just be about your experience. Because if you've had a bad experience with this provider, somebody else will have had a really good experience. And we need to temper that. If you have a view that abstinence is the only way, somebody else will be doing really well and occasionally using. And we need to recognise that without endangering anybody's recovery and without minimising anybody's gains and the gains people have made. We're spending public money, and quite a lot of it, so we have a responsibility to account for what we're doing, because we can't just piss it up against the wall, for want of a better phrase. And we have a duty to get the best value for that money. We can't just spend it frivolously. We have to evidence that we're getting the best out of it. And it helps sometimes to think, and you'll hear this talked about, the Nolan principles of public life. You'll hear it talked about quite a lot around politicians. That's it. That's it and all about it. If you can operate in those 7 ways, then we'll all get along fine and we'll deliver a really good system of support. It's not about you being selfless, having integrity, being objective, remembering that we are accountable, being open, honest, and delivering effective leadership. And I strive, it sounds really, God, this is glorifying, isn't it? I strive to operate like that. As fluffy as it sounds, I think it's the way that we need to view how we operate in the public sector. It's important, really important. Lead and support the ongoing development and the needs assessment. These are the instant, right now jobs, I think. Continue to lead on and support around the assessment of need. It's a dynamic process. It can't be once in every 5 years doing a needs assessment, which is what tends to happen in the public sector. It's got to be continuous. Engage with those in treatment, most importantly, engage with those that aren't in treatment and find out why not. Why aren't you? What's so crap about our system that you don't want to engage with it? How can we make it better for you? Explore prevention, treatment and supply agendas. The other thing that we need to remember is that if you tackle treatment and treatment on its own, you are pissing good money after bad. We need to tackle education and prevention. We also need to work with those that are tackling supply. That doesn't mean grassing people up to the old bill, but we do need to start thinking about how we build a picture of drug markets across the county informed by the community. Because the police don't go out buying it. They just nick people who do. And if they have a focus on heroin, amazingly, they seize a lot of heroin. But they then ignore the fact that there might be other markets that exist. Work to develop and design solutions, explore what works, develop necessary approaches, build an understanding of specialists and wider system of support. And that's about the wider system, because I showed you the specialist system. There's more around it. And mobilise provision where it exists, even if it's not something that you've funded. and then review it. What worked, what didn't. Work on what did, try to get rid of what didn't, or flex it, and what is needed to improve. That's the job. That's it, and all about it. So I'm off now, over to you. Have a nice day. That's it.